Welcome to National Treasures Interviews, the interview series where I, Will Duggan, and Laura Lexx, the two co-hosts, equal co-hosts, there's no hierarchy, of the National Treasures podcast, interviewing some of our favourite historians and art historians and critics. Basically, you may have heard the podcast where Laura and I go on lovely days out through the countryside and to stately homes. Obviously, what with everything that's going on, that's not that popular and available and legal at the moment. So we are doing an online series where we're getting them to come to us. If Mohammed will not go to the mountain will come to Mohammed. Swap Mohammed and mountain for me and Laura and people who know shit. We are doing TED Talks without any knowledge. Correct, Laura?
Do you know, I've never watched a TED Talk.
I've watched 3, 2 of them by people who luckily turned out to be terrible sex pests.
So today we are virtually going to Oxford. Ooh, posh place, middle of England. Well, not the middle of England, but sort of like south middle
West.
of England. Pardon?
Is it west?
It's quite well, I suppose of England, yeah, it is west.
I don't mean like in as opposed to Boston, Massachusetts. Very.
I don't know what you're talking about now. Anyway, it's in England. It's posh. And we are speaking to Abbey Ellis today from the Ashmolean Museum. Now, Abbey specialises in casts, not the sort of broken leg, write your phone number on it kind, but they're like, oh, make a copy of this Greek fitty kind of a cast. Hello, Abbey. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let me add you. Ta-da! Here's Abbey, our lovely guest. So why the Ashmolean Museum? Why are you spending your life there? What is it?
Well, at the minute, I'm a PhD student. I should be based in Leicester, but because of COVID, I am not in Leicester right now. I'm at home on the farm. So the 2 places that I should be, Leicester and Oxford, I'm currently in neither of them.
Where's the farm?
The farm is in Suffolk.
Oh, lovely.
We have 3,000
Now that's east.
And it smells really nice in the summer, I can assure you. So I should be in Leicester right now writing up my PhD thesis. I'm at the School of Museum Studies there, but my project is a collaborative one with the Ashmolean in Oxford, but I'm kind of very much here in my personal capacity as a big fan of the museum just in general. All of those kind of usual disclaimers. These are not the views of the museum. This is just me chatting in my living room.
Hang on a minute.
I'm going to edit that bit out.
School of Museum Studies.
Yes.
As a layman, I'm like, but this is like when I say I did my degree in stand-up comedy, and people are like, you could do a degree in that, and of course you can. It's a science. But now I feel like this about your degree, PhD even.
I didn't know that it existed.
No. What and why? Are there enough people doing this?
Oh yeah, Leicester is actually one of the kind of best places in the country for museum studies, because it turns out a lot of students who then go on to work in museums across the world, because there's a lot more to kind of putting together an exhibition and curating objects and making sure that all your conservation is on point, and a lot of things go into being a museum professional.
Okay, so you love museums. Do you want to work in a museum when you're done?
I would love to. If anyone out there is hiring, please let me.
And what do you want to do? Do you want to be in charge of the air conditioning to keep things dry, or the nicking stuff from other countries? I don't really know what the titles would be, but
what I'd love to do ideally is to kind of work in a learning team or an education department, just because what they do is fantastic for just engaging people with collections, and in terms of their kind of day-to-day jobs, they're always doing something different. One day they might be working with Renaissance paintings, the next day they're working with the casts and putting together things to engage kids, things to engage adults. And I've been lucky enough to actually do some creative projects with the Ashmoleans learning team, just as part of my PhD studies, and it's just so much fun. And so if someone could pay me to do that, I would be delighted.
Abbey, we've got some questions for you.
Sure.
I'm going to start with one that I'm really sorry is a really stupid question, but it's bugging me. Ashmolean is a really great word. What does it mean? What's Ashmolean? I love it. I kind of want like, oh, this coat, it's Ashmolean. Or do you know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm doing that new Ashmolean diet. Yeah. But what's is that the person? Is that Lady Ashmolean?
Yes. Oh, sadly, no.
Oh.
I wish. So it kind of, to explain it, I better kind of just explain a little bit about the history of the museum as a whole. Because the founding collection, kind of the collection that everything else is based off of, dates back to the early 17th century. And
the 1600s.
Yes, I have to do that every time as well. God, I have a little sticker next to I'm writing my thesis. Like, is that the 18th century? Check the number. Yeah. So yes, that is right. 17th century. And the people who started accumulating the collection were the Tradescants, and they were a family of gardeners essentially, and they worked for Lord Salisbury, and they went all over the world finding new plants for his garden. So that tells you how much money he had to have his team of gardeners go out. And as well as the plants, they brought back objects, and they put them all in their London house, and they used to have their friends around to have a look at all of these curiosities that they were bringing back, basically. And they called their house the Ark. You know, a 2x2, two of everything, you know. But obviously the museum isn't called the Tradescantian. That'd be a bit of a mouthful. It's called the Ashmolean, because this other, you know, English antiquary ended up acquiring the collection, and his name was Elias Ashmole. And
right.
He didn't come from, well, he came from a prominent family, but not one that was very wealthy. So before he started collecting all of his things and getting other people's collections, he decided that what he was going to do to get rich quick, this was his scheme, was that he wanted to marry a rich widow.
Nice.
So, I have a very similar plan, yeah.
So here he is in his mid-20s, and at this point he marries a woman who's 23 years his senior.
I thought you were going to say who's 23 and therefore an old widow then. I was like, fucking rush. I get it, all right. But oh my God, she's still only in her 40s then.
Yeah.
Oh Jesus, that's depressing,
that seems to be quite an age gap. But certainly that way round would have been unusual for the time.
So now I've done some basic stalking of you as you're meant to when you're a journalist, which is what Will and I are now. We have a podcast. You specialise in casts. You're doing a show, exhibition at the museum, but obviously you can't get hold of the Venus de Milo.
Yes.
Brilliant. So you might make a cast of it, for example.
Yes.
Why have you picked that to study? What is it about that fascinates you and is interesting and is a question? Like, what that feels like a practical solution to creating museum exhibitions, but tell me more about why it's quite so like, oh, this is a real like subject to get stuck into.
Yeah. So basically, it kind of will probably help if I explain kind of how a cast is made.
Yeah.
They're pretty exact, really. One of my colleagues who did a study in the British Museum with 3D modelling actually scanned some plaster casts and scanned the original Parthenon marbles and found that they're within millimetres of accuracy. Wow. Which is pretty incredible considering some of them are made kind of in the 18th and 19th century. So the casts are historic objects in their own right. And so what would happen is if you're a rich English gentleman, you're going on the grand tour and you've seen some lovely sculptures that you like in Italy and Greece, and you'd have maybe some moulds taken of them. Those moulds would then be basically filled up or swilled round with plaster of Paris, and then you would have your own beautiful replica to take home and put in your grand country house to show off to all your friends about how learned and scholarly you are. So a lot of these casts, their kind of heyday was this 18th, 19th century time. And they're used in museums for teaching, for practical reasons. So like you say, if you want to exhibit, for example, two casts together, and that might be for scholarly reasons, you want to compare I don't know, how the body is represented in the 4th century BC versus the 5th century BC. And instead of looking in photographs, you want to look at something 3D, and in the round, you want to be able to walk around them, see how the sculpture kind of stands in space. Having a cast is really, really useful. It means you don't have to fly all around the world to look at these things.
Sorry, I had misunderstood. I thought by specializing in casts that you had meant like they themselves were ancient Greeks. So they are made, they're like fan fiction, but of the ancient Greeks. So what is the difference, and not to be facetious, between the casts that these gentlemen made to look clever and a really good forgery of a painting?
No, that is a very good question. And the usual answer that I would give is kind of the intent behind the piece. So if you're kind of forging, I can give an example, some paintings by Vermeer. And there was a really, really good forger, and his name was Van Meegeren, and I cannot remember when he was operating.
I think you've gone above and beyond it already.
Yeah, don't worry.
Okay. Names are good. Dates just leave my head as soon as they enter. But basically, he was making these works, and he was passing them off as Vermeer's. He was selling them and making a buck. And then people were obviously annoyed because they thought they'd bought a Vermeer, and they just bought something that this guy had made in his garden room or something.
But now, if I were to buy a Van Meegeren, whilst it wouldn't be as much, he's a famous forger.
Yes.
But a Vermeer would be X amount. But would a Van Meegeren have value? Obviously not as much, but in its own
Quite possibly,
right.
Now that he's well known in his own right, people might buy it for kind of an interest value. Obviously, it's going to be the fraction of the price of the kind of original Vermeer, but still, now that he's well known, this chap, people might want it for, it's a conversation piece. If you have this in your house, you might say, oh, let me tell you the story about this guy. Painting was originally sold for this number of millions of pounds, and now I've got it in my house because they found out all of this about it. So
it's kind of like why I get paid a lot less than Daniel Kitson. He comes up with it and I'm just trying to rip it off.
But as a curator then, I suppose they cast sort of solve and create problems, because on the one hand, let's say, I know that there's a lot of argument at the moment that the British shouldn't have possession of a lot of the things that we have in museums because we nicked them, and we should give them back and let tourism have a chance to go elsewhere. So a cast potentially allows us to have the Rosetta Stone without having the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah.
But then if you're going to do that, I suppose then on the flip side of that, you ask the question of why on earth should people give up their day to come and see a thing that is not the thing? What else can we give them that goes beyond having the thing? Yeah.
Because I think the thing with the casts is that I think I would say most, if not all museums, the intent with casts is not to deceive. So if you go into the Ashmolean and you go to the cast gallery, it is called the cast gallery. It is not called the display of nice Roman sculptures. We have some of those too. They're at the front, the cast at the back.
Like me and Daniel Kitson.
But there are so many things about the casts as well. They are historic objects in their own right. They've been around, like some of the examples that we have in the Ashmolean are older than the Ashmolean itself. The plaster casts are older than the museum. And we have one particular cast. It's one of my favourites. It's a cast of a wild boar. So the original sculpture is a Roman original. It's found on the side of one of the big hills in Rome, and they think it was originally part of a big statue group that was all kind of a hunting scene. So we have this boar, but you can kind of imagine these Roman huntsmen with their spears kind of bearing down on him, and that was the kind of original composition. And we have him in the Ashmolean, but the cast originally lived in the Queen's College, which is one of the colleges down the high street in Oxford, and they used to bring him out. They have an annual boar's dinner, and they would bring him out and they did all these celebrations, and they kind of dress him up, and they'd pet him, and you have these marks
just
on
a
the
normal
cast.
University.
They're all so normal.
Hey, we did that at Kent.
You clearly love museums. Like it's so nice how much you love museums. I've been to as many museums, probably more than the average person. I'm wicked smart. But what are the 3 things that you think make a good museum?
So I think one of the things that I would really like, it's kind of links to what I was saying earlier about really wanting to work in museum education, is just if you can do something in a museum that is a bit more hands-on, because that's kind of, those are the experiences that I have had that have really kind of enabled me to learn the most, or times when I've left the museum and I felt, wow, that was incredible. I can't wait to go back. I want to do all of this again. So, some of the things that I've been doing at the Ashmolean, so things like they have a festival of archaeology. Well, they usually have a festival of archaeology every summer, where it's just loads of kind of crafty activities for kids, but linked to archaeological themes. So sorry, Laura.
Do they have activities for grown-ups? Because it really annoys me when I go to places and they've made a big effort to entertain the children, and I think, hang on a minute, they didn't even pay to come in.
Well, one thing to say about the Ashmolean, entry is free.
Brilliant. You should charge the kids though, just to balance it. They're always getting
just shaking your head there, Will. Nope. But even things like the Festival of Archaeology that they put on in the summer for the kids is usually completely free. And some things that we were doing with them, we were doing a bit of plaster casting in the museum. We were making these little Roman ornaments. They're kind of little circular things that were little discs that would have been hung up in Roman houses as decorative pieces. And we were making them in the bottom of plastic bowls with kids out of plaster of Paris. We were getting some clay, pushing some like toy animals, like plastic things into there, and having knives and little forks and things to make impressions in there. Then popping the plaster in, taking it out, and then you would have had a little mould with your design on. And the kids absolutely loved it. It gives them a new perspective on seeing casts in the gallery, because so many of the casts, I mean, they look like marble and bronze because they're painted to resemble the originals. But if you get the chance, even if for me, as someone who's writing a PhD on the stuff, just getting a chance to handle materials and getting a sense of, okay, now I kind of understand a little bit about what it would have been like for someone in these workshops making these things that I can now go and see. I can pick it up and touch it and feel it. Number 2. So I guess it's kind of a similar point, but it's kind of about accessibility, I would say. So, but also with the accessibility in terms of things like writing labels and designing activities, having it kind of with little jargon, so that someone who's never stepped foot into a museum before can, understand, and there's not too much kind of technical knowledge that might just alienate them and make me feel, oh, this museum isn't really a place for me. But at the same time, having some elements that are kind of not pitched too low or not dumbing anything down, so that anyone who has been to museums all their life and wants to learn something new can also learn something. So it's just like striking that balance, I think, is ideal, and it's very, very hard to do. There's so much to take in, and you cannot read every single label. It's just it's a fact.
And the museum guilt, do you ever get the guilt when you've been in there for like an hour and you're bored?
Yeah. And also, if you come out of a temporary exhibition or something, you think, well, I don't think I quite got it.
Stop the video, Abbey Ellis. We have an important announcement. I feel like breaking news every time we do this, Laura.
I know what you mean. We interrupt this broadcast to tell you about some people who have been exceptionally kind to us and become patrons this week. Thank you, Kate Johnson.
Thank you, Tom Bidmead.
Thank you, Poppy Gilbert.
And thank you, lastly, but not leastly, but also not morely, the same as those 3, Eddie Kristen. Thank you so much for joining our Patreon. It really helps with, affording to do this, because it costs. It actually costs.
Yes, your welcome packages are in the post, if not with you by the time you see this. So I hope you like your badge and your photos, and I hope that you're enjoying the Years and Years podcast. The 1750 episode is live on the Patreon already, along with all of their videos, the extra bits from these interviews that we put up there. And the next episode of Years and Years featuring the year 876 will be available at the end of this week.
Yes, and if you want to join the membership, which I think you should want to, because I want to, but it's pointless because it'll be in and then it's ridiculous. Patreon.com/National Treasures. So yeah, thank you again to our 4 new friends, best friends, who knows? Laura?
Is that you have such a way of ending on a sentence without sounding like you finished. That's it. Back to us in these studios, but back in time. You own a museum. Budget is no issue. Abby, fill this museum with stuff. Budget's no issue. Also, no issue is
Abalolian.
it's called the Abalolian. Cultural appropriation's no issue. So anything you want, it's not going to be sad for anybody else if you take it. And we can store anything. What are the first 5 things you 100% want in your museum?
Okay, so are you ready for the shopping list? So I think the first thing that immediately popped into my head, because I would like to display it very differently to how it is currently displayed.
Oh, we're going to get some museum shade.
The Mona Lisa in the Louvre, because I've been there. I went a couple of years ago and I was so disappointed because, for a start, she's a lot smaller than you think she's going to be, but it's also pretty impossible to actually see her because of the crowd. And what actually had to happen was my fiance kind of grabbed me and pulled me to the front. I was just going, no, I don't want to push and shove people. He was like, push. And we went to see it, and you're constantly being jostled, and everyone's got their selfie sticks waving around, and you can't sit and appreciate what is a truly incredible and impactful and beautiful artwork because of all of this crowding.
What else are we having?
So I'm plundering the Louvre again because I would quite like the Nike of Samothrace, but as we're saying,
What is that?
So she is a ancient Greek sculpture from the 4th century BC.
Fucking hell, that's old.
And she's monumental. She's absolutely huge. She doesn't have a head because that doesn't survive, but she's a winged female. She's the personification of victory. It's kind of one of the saddest and like most pathetic moments in my museum career. When I first saw her, because she's at the top of the stairs in the Louvre, and you gaze up on her, and I just burst into tears.
Oh,
She's so beautiful. She's this winged lady, and she's represented stepping down onto the prow of a ship because she was put up to commemorate a naval victory. And so she's shown blowing in the wind, and all of her clothes are plastered to her body, and there's just such energy and such movement in this piece of marble. And it's just so incredible. And I'd studied her so much, and then I saw her at the top of the stairs, and I was just in floods of tears.
Babe, that's so nice.
We're having her.
I've just Googled it. She's got no head and no arms.
No.
But she is about 8 times better than the Mona Lisa. Number 3.
We did mention briefly at the start of the podcast that I'm from Suffolk, and so I plundered the British Museum for my next one for the Sutton Hoo helmet. And it's obviously not on display in Suffolk, it's in the British Museum. It's a National Trust site at Sutton Hoo, and they have a replica there.
You can buy a pretty good replica for 260 quid from the Danbury Mint. Number 4.
Okay, so we've got a couple of Frenchies stuff, and we've got, all right, okay, I'm liking this so far. It's eclectic.
And then another thing that I'd have technically isn't a museum object, but I'm hoping you'll let me get away with it. So again, before all of this kicked off, one of the last things that I did in January 2020 was I went to the Tutankhamun exhibition at the Saatchi Gallery. Okay. So that was a fantastic exhibition. It was loads of the objects from Tutankhamun's tomb that had previously kind of never traveled out of Egypt. So it was incredible to see. But one of the best things that we did was right at the end, it was me and my mum, and we decided to go on the virtual reality tour of Tutankhamun's tomb. And you sat in this little pod It's kind of an egg-shaped thing, which was a seat, and then you had the VR goggles on, and you had a big set of headphones, and they kind of flew you over the tomb, and they dropped you down, and you felt the drop as you went. And they warn you at the start, there's a bit of a drop, and you think, yeah, it's virtual reality, it'll be fine. And you actually do the drop, and you're like, shit.
Number 5.
So I thought I better have a painting, something a bit more traditional. And I was torn between the Night Watch and the Rijksmuseum, because I just stood in front of that for so long, just because there's so many details. And I think it's one of those paintings that you can, if you walk up to and get a bit closer, you kind of see one aspect of it, and then you walk away and you kind of look at the overall picture, and you notice something different every time. And in the Rijksmuseum, they did a fantastic job of the interpretation, because you could just stand there and look at it, and there was nothing that could kind of distract from it, really. There was no kind of signs or labels that were kind of right in your face. But what they did do is they had these big cardboard kind of panels at the back, so you could turn around and pick one up, and then it would point out little things to you that you could then go and look at.
I love that you appreciate that. I love that you're appreciating the painting, but you are also appreciating how they've let you appreciate the painting. That's really cool. Okay, right. We've smashed enough questions at you. I think, depending on whether Will's picking these out in chronological order, I beat him very soundly in the last quiz we did, if you count how much I cheated. Have you got some questions for us where we can test our intelligence?
I have indeed. And
yes!
If you get the answers right, I will be very, very impressed.
Okay.
So, which Disney princess has a link to the Ashmolean Museum?
It's Ariel.
No.
Damn.
What was your reasoning for Ariel?
There are quite a few statues of Ariel in Copenhagen, or Hagen, if you're Laura, and I thought you may have one of them.
Pocahontas.
Ding, ding, ding,
Oh,
ding,
fuck!
ding.
Oh.
Yes! Correct!
Oh, I just
Very
punched my
impressed.
ceiling, but I'm so happy.
Bonus point, how do you think she's linked with the Ashmolean? Go on, Will.
Her second husband, after John Rolfe,
Ooh.
was maybe a part of the family that employed the gardeners who started it.
That is a good guess, but it's to do with her father,
Chief Powhatan.
Chief Powhatan, yes, because we in the Ashmolean, part of the founding collection was Powhatan's mantle.
Ooh.
And a mantle is either something that you would, well, for a start, early on when they were interpreting it, they believed that this mantle was something that Powhatan would have worn, so as an item of clothing. But now they think, because it's enormous, it's like a 2.5 meter long and 1.5 meter wide kind of collection of deer hides all stitched together and then decorated with cowrie shells. They think it was actually kind of a wall hanging, perhaps, that would have been in the sacred space of the tribe, but we have that. And
is that something he gave willingly?
I don't know. Okay, ready for question 2?
Yes.
I'm ready.
So, as the clock struck midnight and Oxford welcomed in the year 2000, a £3 million Cézanne painting was stolen from the Ashmolean Museum. How do you think the thieves got in?
Did they just walk into an unlocked door?
No. It was, shall I tell you?
Wait a minute, give us the date again.
Soon.
It was New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve. It was welcoming in the year 2000. So I guess you'd say New Year's Eve 1999.
Did they use fireworks as a cover to bust open
did.
a door?
They did. So one of the Ashmolean's most popular objects with visitors is an Italian Renaissance plate with a picture of a face on it. Now, it's quite an unassuming object when you describe it like that. It's only 23 centimetres big, so it's not even kind of big and impressive, really. So what do you think about it makes it such a crowd-drawing attraction? What could it be?
So it's either going to be what it's made of or whose face it is.
Interesting.
A face on a plate like that instantly makes me think Aztec, so like Atahualpa or something like
Sorry,
that.
what?
So
What?
it's Renaissance.
No,
So it was
sorry.
made in
Renaissance.
1536.
Hang on.
Okay.
What name did you just pull out of your head then? Atahualpa?
Atahualpa. I was like an Incan chieftain
not-
or something
I'm-
from like the.
I'm not.
I
gonna
only
pull
know
the
it from a
rug.
play. I don't know.
There we
I
go,
don't know
there
it
we
from
fucking
science.
Go.
I know it from Royal Hunt for the Sun, I think, which is a play I did when I was at college. Atahualpa. I played one of Atahualpa's advisors, and I wore a llama head on top of my own head.
Wow.
I was the only character that didn't sing, which was very similar to my appearance in Greece, where I played Frenchie, also the only character that didn't sing.
But they're trying to tell you something about your
I
singing.
think there might have been.
The only Incan or Aztec emperor I know is Cuzco.
Cusco,
Going back to Disney now.
Anyway, the point is,
That's my
sorry,
favourite
we've
Disney
got to let
film.
Abby go. We've had her for so long.
Yes, we have.
Has he got? A
Is it
dick
all
on his
made of
head?
gold? Is the whole thing gold?
What did you say, Will?
He's got a dick on his head or something.
His head is made of dicks.
What?
Fuck you, everyone. Champion of the world.
That's a good guess. So he is a literal dickhead because it's it's the outline of the head and there's loads of tiny penises around on the head. And basically, these kinds of plates, when they were made, what the tradition was that if you were, well-to-do Italian gentleman and you wanted to woo a lady of your choice, you would have her face put on a plate with her name, and you would present it as a lover's gift. You're so wonderful, I've made you this plate. I don't think I'd be very impressed if my significant other presented me with this, but that's what they're doing at the time.
It's a Renaissance dick pic.
So what I'd like you to do now is tell us why, when lockdown's over, or maybe you're watching this and lockdown is mercifully over and we can go and start enjoying ourselves again.
Fingers crossed.
Why should we come to the Ashmolean?
So for a start, come to the museum because entry is free, apart from the big temporary exhibitions. Like if you're in Oxford for the day and it's cold and wet and horrible, come into the Ashmolean. There's a cafe, there's a restaurant. It's a lovely, lovely place to be, even if you're just popping in for 5 minutes to browse.
Is the cafe good though? What's the best thing in the
cafe? It is very
cafe?
good. And, it's a kind of a cliched thing to say. There's something for everyone, but I really, really do think that there is at the Ashmolean. The collections cover kind of 4 centuries worth of stuff. You can see genuine ancient Greek and Roman artifacts. You can see the best collection of early Egyptian archaeology outside of Cairo. You can see stuff by Picasso. You can see stuff by Michelangelo. There really is so much to see, and I don't even think you can do that museum in one day. The Ashmolean has so much online as well. You can just look at the collection online. They have a Museum Secrets podcast series. I know I'm coming on a podcast to mention another podcast. But they have
that is getting cut.
In the cast gallery, we have one major space that's open to everyone. You can wander in there whenever you like, but you can go on downstairs in the cast gallery tours. These are free. They take about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, on Thursdays and Saturdays at 2 p.m. And you can actually go downstairs into where the main collection is stored, because we have over 1,000 casts at the Ashmolean. The space isn't usually open to the public because the casts are so crammed into a tiny room. It's like wandering through kind of the most magical junk shop you've ever seen. But volunteers run the tours. They're always so enthusiastic, so happy to talk to you. I used to work as a volunteer, so doing that tour. So yeah, just come along and see that space, because the tours are criminally kind of underused by people. People don't know that they're going on. So if you come on a Thursday or a Saturday, go downstairs in the cast gallery, because it's such an experience. Right,
Abby, we've had you for so long. We're going to let you go. Please let us know where we can find you, the Ashmolean, anything you want to highlight on social media before we do.
So I'm at Abbey in Museums on Twitter and Instagram. I share lots of photos of casts and other pretty things on Instagram, so come and have a look. And the Ashmolean is just at Ashmolean Museum, and I really hope you do pay a visit if you listen to this podcast.
Thank you so much. You can follow us at Treasures Pod on everything. apart from TikTok, because we are in our mid-30s.
Early
Adults.
30s. Early 30s.
And you can email us at nationaltreasurespodcast@gmail.com. Anything to add, Laura?
Thank you so much to Abbey Ellis for, in association with the Ashmolean Museum, but not necessarily representing their views and all that crap. Thank you very much for watching. Please listen to National Treasures. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
90 minutes this was before editing. 90.